Exactly 1 year ago today, as I'm recording this, April 22nd, 2022, the world's youngest Grandmaster came to the Marshall Chess Club and held a simul where he played 29 players all at the same time. He did very well. He won the vast majority of the games, he drew about three, and he only lost one, which was miraculously to me. So that's the game I'm going to show you today. In case you aren't aware who the world's youngest grandmaster is, his name is Abhimanyu Mishra. He's a 14-year-old from New Jersey, and when it comes to chess, he is an absolute prodigy. He is the US's youngest national master, and additionally, he's also the world's youngest international master. But in June of 2021, he earned his most impressive feat, which was becoming the world's youngest grandmaster at the age of 12 years, 4 months, and 25 days. He had to beat out people like Bobby Fischer and Magnus Carlsen. He earned the grandmaster title at an earlier age than they did. Good lord, that's impressive. I was still playing with Bionicles at that age. All right, focus up. Needless to say, Abi is a beast at chess, and he did not go down without a fight. This was a very difficult game for me. When I was at the board, I was going through some deep analysis, some very long calculations. So I'm going to walk you through every step of the game and what I was thinking in every moment. So let's cut to the game now. Abi is going to be on top, so he had the white pieces and I had the black pieces. In this simul, he had the white pieces for every game, and he opened every game with e4. So as you can guess, this game started with e4. And I responded with the caro-kann, which is one of my favorite openings for black. So I played c6. Abi went d4, taking the center, and I went d5, striking back. Here, Abi played e5, so he chose to go into the advanced variation, where you push this pawn past the d5 pawn and create this little pawn chain usually. So I played bishop f5 here, and Abi played knight d2. This was the first move that I hadn't actually seen ever. It took me a minute to understand what the point was, but the idea is that this knight on d2 wants to swing over to b3 and exert more pressure on this c5 square. Usually in the caro-kann, black wants to play c5 so that we can break up white's center and attack the bottom of this pawn chain. So Abi wants to bring this knight over to b3 to discourage us from playing c5. So that was the idea of the move. I just continued normally. I just played e6, where we create this little pawn chain, so this pawn on d5 is very well defended. And here, of course, Abi went knight b3, again to control this c5 square a little bit more and discourage us from playing c5 later on. So here I went knight d7, again trying to fight over the c5 square. This knight now covers this square, so the c5 advance is a little bit easier. Abi played knight f3 here, and here I just played h6. It's kind of a common idea in this caro-kann where you want to keep this bishop on this diagonal, and you play h6 so that you can tuck this bishop away and you can develop the knight by bringing it to e7 and then swinging it over to f5 or potentially to g6. So Abi responded with bishop e2, and I went knight e7, again with the idea of just bringing this bishop back and then putting the knight in front and replacing the bishop with the knight. So here Abi castled. I continued with my plan, bishop h7, and Abi played a4 here. So he's grabbing more space on the queen side, which of course is good, but I didn't feel like it was a big threat. I didn't think this was something I needed to respond to. So I could have played a5 to stop the advance of his a-pawn, but I didn't feel that if he pushed this pawn two more times that this would cause me any issues. I would just play b6, and then that would even support c5 later on. So I decided to ignore it and just continue developing. So I played knight f5, finishing my plan. Abi played a5, and now I go bishop e7. Playing bishop e7 does allow this explosive move, which Abi played in the game, which is g4. This forces my knight to go to h4, and after the knights trade, I take back with the bishop, and while this bishop is a little sidelined on h4, Abi's king is also more exposed. He's just played g4. He's just pushed the pawn in front of his king 2 squares, so his king is a little bit weaker. So I felt that this would compensate for the actual sidelined bishop that I have here. Abi played f4 here, which is another very aggressive move. He's, again, pushing the pawn in front of his king, so he's exposing his king, but he wants to create this pawn storm here and just crash through, break up my center, and hopefully checkmate me very early. So I responded with just castling, not really fearing something like g5, which might trap my bishop, because concretely we know if he plays g5, I'll take back, and if the pawn takes, I'll take back with the bishop. So everything is perfectly secure here. Abi played bishop d3, and here I brought my bishop back to e7. This was an unnecessary move, and you'll see the eval bar drop a little bit. White has a relatively good advantage here. I didn't need to drop my bishop back because, again, there wasn't actually any threat of my bishop getting trapped. So this was an unnecessary move, unfortunately, and there would have been something better. But nonetheless, I played bishop e7. Abi took with check. I took back, and now he plays f5. Again, just creating this pawn storm, trying to crash through my king side and hopefully checkmate me very early. I actually wasn't very afraid of the kingside attack. Abi's pieces aren't very developed right now, so I thought that I would be totally fine, and I was not afraid of this f6 move. There was a variation that I'll show that I actually should have been afraid of, but I've always heard that when someone's attacking you on one side, the best thing to do is to strike back in the center. So I played c5 here, attacking this pawn chain. Abi responded with c3. A better move would have been f6, actually, and I had calculated some of these lines, but there's one that I missed that would have been very good for Abi. So I had calculated g takes f6, and then if Abi were to play something like queen d3 check, I would play king g7. I actually think my king is relatively safe here, so I wasn't super worried about this variation. But if instead of queen d3 check, Abi were to play e takes f6, I would have taken back with a knight, and then after queen d3 check, we can play knight e4, which blocks the connection between these two pieces. And again, I think my king is relatively safe. The variation that I had missed was actually just queen d2. So queen d2 sets up a battery against this pawn on h6, and there's no real way to defend it, but I thought rook h8 would be totally fine. Once Abi takes this pawn, then I'll have this rook here on the semi-open file, and hopefully that'll help my counterattacking chances. So taking this pawn right away doesn't really do much. The move that I had missed is e takes f6 now. So now when I take back, Abi will take on h6 with check. I'll have to play king g8. And now after queen g5 check, my king has to go to f8, so it's a little vulnerable here, that's for sure. Additionally, my knight on f6 is a little weak. It's being attacked by two pieces. This isn't exactly a problem right now, but the problem is that this c5 pawn is actually undefended. So white can play knight takes c5, and I cannot take back with the bishop because then this knight would only have one defender, and white has two attackers on it. So this position was actually something to be avoided, but luckily, Abi did not go into any of this, and he just played c3, and who could blame him? He was probably standing at my board for a good 5 seconds before he played this move because, you know, he had 28 other boards to worry about. So this seeing c3 was definitely a sigh of relief for me. Now I played rook c8, just bringing my rook to this file that is going to be opened very soon because we have lots of pawn tension here. Abi responded with bishop e3, and now I finally took in the center with the c5 pawn just to, again, increase the scope of this rook. Abi took back with the pawn, and here I played bishop g5. I felt that although my king was a little exposed, and Abi did have, you know, this pawn storm here, I felt that if I could trade off this dark squared bishop, my king would be pretty safe, and maybe I'd even have some chances to get some counterattack going. So Abi played queen d3 here, and now I traded bishops, and finally decided to start going on the attack. So I played the move queen h4 here, which attacks the g4 pawn and also puts pressure on the h2 pawn. So I'm getting my queen nice and active. I finally finished development, and we're hoping to actually create some kind of attack on white's king here. Abi responded with queen f3, which defends the g4 pawn, and now I play rook c2. So we're creating a checkmate threat against h2, and if you look at the eval bar, you'll actually see that we have equalized here. So Abi played h3. This was the only move that kept equality. Every other move actually would have given black a slight edge, so we would have been slightly winning. So I took this opportunity to bring my other rook to the c file. Now we've doubled up. We have a lot of control on this file, and Abi started to contest it by playing rook a to c1. I traded rooks, and he took back with a knight. In case you're wondering why he didn't take back with the rook, it's that we would have traded rooks, and then we would have played queen e1 check. And if the king moves anywhere, if the king moves here or here, then this knight on c1 is hanging. And additionally, if Abi were to play queen f1, we would play queen e3 check, which hits this pawn on d4 and checks the king. If he were to play queen f2, again, this knight would hang. So this is why he had to take back with the knight, and why I wanted to play this move, because having to have your knight here on c1 is not ideal. It's less than ideal, so that's for sure. So now I played queen g5, dropped my queen back, and attacked this knight. Abhi played knight d3, of course, to get it to safety. And here I played rook c4. I thought this was a really nice move because we're attacking this d4 pawn, which is the bottom of Abhi's pawn chain in the center. And if this d4 pawn falls, I think his whole center is going to collapse. So I was very happy with rook c4. I thought this was a nice place for the rook. Here Abhi traded pawns and then played knight f4, which was a really nice move and one that I actually missed. So knight f4 attacks this e6 pawn, which we cannot allow him to take. If we lose the e6 pawn, our center is collapsing and we will definitely lose. So I had to drop my queen back to e7. Here Abhi played queen d3 check, and I dropped my king back to g8. Here Abhi played the move knight g6, which attacks the queen, and we have to move it. This is what I would say is the critical position of the game. There is only one move that keeps equality for black. Every other move gives white an advantage, so pause the video and try to find it. Hopefully you're able to find the move. The move is queen b4, just completely abandoning the king side, allowing white to get some king side threats, but we're hoping as black that our queenside pressure against this pawn and this pawn as well is going to compensate. Hopefully white's king will be exposed enough that we can actually have some threats of our own. So here Abhi played queen f3, and at this point I felt that we at the very least had enough to get a draw. So you'll see in the game what actually happened. Here I went queen takes b2. The reason we take on b2 with the queen as opposed to taking on d4 first with the rook is that we want this queen to be able to take on d4 with check. So this tempo is actually very, very important, as you'll see. So here Abhi goes queen f7 check. We have only one square, so we have to play king h7, and now Abhi plays knight e7. You now see how important that tempo was, because if white were to have an extra move, white would play queen g8 checkmate. So Abhi has created a checkmating threat, but luckily we have the only move that keeps our advantage, which is queen d4 check. There are quite a few variations to calculate here. In the game, Abhi played king h1, but I looked at some other ones as well. If white were to play rook f2 here, I would have played rook c1 check. The king does not want to go to h2 because then I would take this pawn with check. So instead, white would have to play king g2. But here, I would just play queen e4 check. If white were to block with the queen, I would just trade queens, and then I would take this pawn on e5. We're in an endgame. We're up 3 pawns. We're doing very, very well. If instead white were to play rook f3, then I would probably just check with this rook here on c2, and our rook and queen are honestly just swarming the white king. You can see the eval bar. Black is doing very, very well. And again, if we can trade pieces off, we'll just get into an endgame where we're up a few pawns. So this would have been very good for me. But as I mentioned, Abhi actually played king h1 here. So I went queen e4 check. Abhi does not want to play king h2 because, as I mentioned before, I'll take this e5 pawn with check. Additionally, Abhi does not want to play queen f3 because we'll trade queens, and then I'll take this pawn on e5, and again, we're in an endgame where we're up 3 pawns. He doesn't want to play king g1 either. If he plays king g1, then I'll go queen e3 check, and after king g2, I'll go rook c2 check, and now my pieces are actually just swarming the king, and this should be completely winning for black. So instead, Abhi played rook f3, blocking the check. Here I played rook c1 check, attacking the king, and after king g2, I played rook c2 check. In the game, Abhi played king g3 here, but the move that actually would have led to a crazier line is king h1. So if I wanted, I could just give some perpetual checks and get a draw. But if I wanted to go for the win, I would have had to have played knight f6. I don't know if I would have seen this move, but I might have evaluated it. This move does a couple things. First and foremost, it cuts off the connection between the rook and the queen. So if white allows it, I'll take this rook on f3 with check, and I'll checkmate the white king. This knight on f6 also covers the g8 square, so white cannot play queen g8 checkmate. So there are a couple variations to look at. As I mentioned, if this pawn takes the knight, then we'll simply take the rook here and we'll checkmate the white king. Otherwise, the only other move is to play something like queen f6 check, but here we will trade queens, we'll take the knight, and after white takes our knight, we'll take back with the pawn, and we're in a rook endgame where we're up 3 pawns. This is theoretically winning. I don't know if I would have won it against a Grandmaster, but it is theoretically winning, so I think Abhi didn't want to go for this. Of course, none of this actually happened during the game because Abhi did not play king h1. Instead, he played king g3. So here I went with queen e1 check, and now the king can't move. If the king comes to f4, then queen takes e5 will be checkmate. So Abhi has to play rook f2, blocking the check. Black would be fine just to trade off all the pieces with queen takes, queen will take back, and then if the rook takes and the king takes, I could take this pawn on e5. This would be fine. I'd be up 3 pawns, but the better move is queen g1 check. Now white really has no good options. If white were to play king f4, then again, we actually have checkmate in 1, so queen takes f2 would be checkmate. Separately, if white were to block with the rook, then we could just play something like rook takes, and we're actually going to be mating in just a few moves. So the only other option is to play king h4, but here we would take this rook with check, we would force a queen trade, and we would just be up a rook and 2 pawns. Abhi saw this, of course, and actually didn't play it out, so after queen g1 check, he resigned. I was ecstatic. I think I was mumbling expletives to myself when he resigned because I couldn't believe that I had actually just beaten a Grandmaster, even if it was just in a simul. Now, I know that if we played a full game classical, any other time control, he would absolutely crush me. You know, just imagine a shoe and a cockroach. I'd be the cockroach. Luckily for me, he had to worry about 28 other games going on all at the same time, so that undoubtedly helped me in getting this win. Nonetheless, I was super grateful just to be able to play someone of his stature. He has been performing off the charts. Recently, I think he actually won a tournament where he performed at the level of a super GM, which is 2,700. So you're undoubtedly going to be hearing this guy's name in the future. He is absolutely a beast. If you guys enjoyed this game, then please give the video a thumbs up so that more people can see it, and also be sure to subscribe so that you can check out my future videos too.